The blizzard descended upon the Montana territory like a vengeful spirit, blanketing the world in a blur of white. Wind howled through the valley, carrying ice particles that stung like needles against any exposed skin. Through this curtain of white, Clara Sullivan fought her way toward the barn, one arm raised to shield her eyes, the other clutching a rope that led to the small shed, where a newborn calf lay shivering beside its exhausted mother. "Come on," she muttered, though her words were immediately torn away by the wind. "Just a little further." 6 months ago, William would have been beside her, his broad shoulders taking the brunt of the storm, his steady hands guiding the frightened animals to safety. 6 months since she'd found him collapsed in the field, his face contorted in pain. 6 months since she'd become the widow Sullivan left alone to manage a ranch too large for one person on the edge of a Montana winter. The calf stumbled its spindly legs, nearly buckling under the assault of the wind. Clara stooped, gathering the trembling creature into her arms. Its weight threatened to topple her, but she gritted her teeth and pressed forward. One step. Another. The barn door seemed impossibly distant, a smudge of darker gray in the swirling white. "We're not dying today," she told the calf, her voice firmer now. "Not today." By the time she reached the barn, her muscles screamed in protest. She shouldered the door open and staggered inside, setting the calf down on a bed of fresh straw. The mother cow followed, guided by maternal instinct and the promise of shelter. Clara secured the door against the storm, the sudden silence almost as disorienting as the howling wind had been. In the lantern light, she checked the calf for frostbite, running her hands over its trembling form. It would live. They both would. Another small victory in a war of attrition against the elements, against loneliness, against the slow, inexorable decline that had begun the moment William drew his last breath. Later, after ensuring all the animals were fed and sheltered, Clara trudged back to the main house. The wind had died down somewhat, but the snow continued to fall, erasing her footprints almost as quickly as she made them. Inside the house was warm but empty, the silence pressing against her like a physical weight. She removed her snow-crusted coat and boots, then moved to the desk by the window. From the drawer, she withdrew a folded piece of paper worn along the creases from frequent handling. William's last letter. Or rather, the letter he'd been writing when whatever sickness had taken him first showed its symptoms. "If anything happens to me, don't trust Harrington," she read aloud, her finger tracing the familiar words. "I've discovered what they're doing at Willow Creek." While the rest remained a mystery. William had never finished the letter, and Clara had found it tucked into his journal days after the funeral. She'd asked around town about Willow Creek, but received only vague answers and uncomfortable glances. Victor Harrington was the wealthiest man in the territory, owner of the largest ranch and employer of half the town. Nobody wanted to speak ill of him, especially to a widow who might soon be forced to sell her land. Clara folded the letter and returned it to the drawer. Outside, the storm intensified, rattling the windows with renewed fury. She stoked the fire, then settled into William's old chair, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders. The quiet stretched around her, broken only by the crackling of the flames and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. In these moments, the loneliness was almost unbearable. Not just the absence of William, but the absence of any human voice, any human touch. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and with the winter settling in, such visits would become increasingly rare. Clara closed her eyes, allowing herself one moment of weakness, one silent tear for all she had lost. Then, with the practiced determination that had carried her through the past 6 months, she straightened her shoulders and reached for her mending basket. The work would not do itself, and tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight alone. She did not know that tomorrow would also bring strangers to her door, strangers who would change everything. 3 days after the blizzard, when the world had settled into the pristine stillness that follows such storms, Clara heard the sound of approaching horses. She was in the yard clearing a path to the barn when the riders appeared at the edge of her property. Two figures silhouetted against the late afternoon sun, one tall and one small. Clara straightened her hand instinctively, moving to the pocket where she kept William's small revolver. Visitors were rare enough in good weather. In the aftermath of a blizzard, they were almost unheard of. The riders approached slowly, giving her plenty of time to study them. The man sat tall in the saddle, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat crusted with snow along the edges. Behind him, clinging to his waist, was a child, a girl Clara realized as they drew closer. They stopped at a respectful distance, and the man removed his hat. "Ma'am," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Name's Ethan Calloway. Heard in town you might be looking for help with your ranch." Clara studied him carefully. He had the weathered look of a man who'd spent most of his life outdoors, with dark hair, streaked with premature gray at the temples, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Those eyes held something familiar, the same haunted look she sometimes caught in her own reflection. "Who told you that?" she asked, neither confirming nor denying. "Storekeeper, Coleman, I believe, said the widow Sullivan was trying to manage alone." He paused, then added, "Said you were too proud to ask for help, but might not turn it away if it came knocking." Despite herself, Clara felt a flicker of amusement. That sounded like Robert Coleman, always meddling in everyone's business under the guise of community concern. "And you just happened to be looking for work?" she asked. The man, Calloway, glanced back at the child behind him. "Truth is, we've been riding for near on 3 weeks. My daughter and I need a place to winter. I'm handy with cattle, can fix most anything broken, and I don't drink or gamble. You'd get honest work for fair wages." As he spoke, the girl slipped down from the horse. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with tangled dark hair and large, solemn eyes that seemed too old for her thin face. She clutched a cloth doll to her chest, and even from a distance Clara could see the weariness in the slump of her small shoulders. "Papa," the girl whispered, tugging at her father's coat. "I'm cold." Something shifted in Clara's chest, a loosening of a knot she hadn't realized was there. She thought of the empty rooms in her house, the silence that pressed against her ears each night, the way she sometimes caught herself speaking aloud simply to hear a human voice. "What's your daughter's name?" she asked, her voice softer than before. "Sarah," Calloway replied, "though she'll answer to Sadie sometimes, too." Clara looked at them closely. The man's boots were worn at the heels, his clothes patched, but clean. The child's dress had been let down at least twice, the hem showing different ages of fabric. But it was their eyes that decided her. That particular weariness she recognized from her own mirror. The look of people who'd lost something irreplaceable and were still learning how to carry on without it. "You can put your horses into the barn," she said finally. "There's fresh hay in the loft. When you're done, come to the house. I've got stew on the stove, and it's too much for one person anyway." Relief flickered across Calloway's face, though he tried to hide it. "We're obliged, Mrs. Sullivan, truly." Clara watched them lead their horses toward the barn, the little girl's hand firmly clasped in her father's. The wind picked up again, sending dried leaves skittering across the yard like tiny bones. Winter was settling in, sure enough, but for the first time since William's passing, the thought didn't fill her with dread. She went inside to check the stew and add more wood to the fire. The cabin felt different somehow, as if it were waking from a long sleep. She found herself taking down 3 bowls instead of 1. 3 spoons, 3 cups. The movements felt rusty, but right, like stretching muscles that had been still too long. Through the window she could see the soft glow of a lantern in the barn. Calloway would be thorough, she suspected. He had the look of someone who understood that first impressions mattered, especially when you had a child depending on you. Clara paused in her preparations, struck by a sudden memory. William had knocked on her father's door 12 years ago, hat in hand, looking for work. She had watched from the stairs as a 20-year-old girl, captivated by the young man's earnest face and steady gaze. Now here she was, on the other side of that door, holding the power to change someone's fortune with a simple yes or no. The knock came sooner than expected. When she opened the door, Calloway and his daughter stood on the porch, their faces freshly washed, the child's hair hastily braided. The girl still clutched her doll, but her free hand held her father's tightly. "Come in," Clara said, stepping aside. "Warm yourselves by the fire." They entered cautiously, and Sarah's eyes widened as she took in the cabin's interior. It wasn't fancy, frontier homes rarely were, but Clara had kept it neat and welcoming. Quilts made by her mother hung on the walls, and William's books still lined the shelf he'd built their first winter together. "It's pretty," Sarah whispered, then looked up at her father as if afraid she'd spoken out of turn. "Thank you," Clara said gently, "and you're welcome to look around. Would you like to help me set the table?" The child nodded eagerly, carefully placing her doll on a chair before following Clara to the cupboard. Her small hands shook slightly as she carried the bowls to the table, treating them like precious things. Over supper, the cabin filled with something it had been missing for 6 months: conversation. Calloway ate with the careful appreciation of someone who'd gone hungry before, while Sarah struggled to keep her eyes open between bites. "How long since her mother?" Clara asked quietly, nodding toward the drowsing child. 4 months, Calloway replied, his voice rough. "Fever took her." Clara understood that lie immediately. There was something in his eyes, a shadow too dark for the simple tragedy of illness. But she didn't press. Everyone carried secrets in these territories, and some were best left undisturbed until trust was established. "And you've been traveling since then?" "Working where we could. Harvest season helped some, but most folks don't want to take on a hand with a child in tow." He glanced at his daughter, and his weathered face softened. "Can't say I blame them, but I couldn't leave her with strangers. Not after everything." The fire crackled in the hearth, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Outside something howled. Wolf or wind, it was hard to tell. Sarah stirred, whimpering softly, and without thinking, Clara reached over to smooth the child's hair. "There's a small room off the kitchen," she found herself saying. "Used to be for storage, but it's got a window and room for 2 bedrolls. If you're minded to stay, that is. $30 a month plus board, and I'll expect you to earn it." Calloway's head came up sharply. "You're offering us the job." "I'm offering you a trial," Clara corrected. 2 weeks to prove you're as good as you say. The land here doesn't forgive mistakes, Mr. Calloway." "You'll get your money's worth," he said simply. "You have my word." They shook hands across the table, his calluses matching hers. It was a frontier contract, sealed with nothing but honor and necessity. Sarah had fallen fully asleep now, her head pillowed on her arms, the cloth doll trapped beneath her cheek. "Let me," Calloway said, starting to rise, but Clara waved him back. "Finish your coffee. I'll show her to the room." She lifted the child carefully, surprised by how light she was. Sarah stirred, but didn't wake, her arms coming up automatically to wrap around Clara's neck. The trust in that simple gesture made something crack inside Clara's chest, like ice breaking on a frozen stream. The storage room had been cleaned that very morning, as if she'd somehow known visitors were coming. She laid Sarah on the old feather mattress and pulled a quilt over her small form. In the lamplight, the child looked even younger, all sharp angles and hollow places that spoke of too many missed meals. When she returned to the main room, Calloway was standing by the fire, staring into the flames. "I'm grateful, Mrs. Sullivan," he said quietly. "More than you know." "Clara," she corrected. "And save your gratitude until you see what needs doing. This place has been fighting me every step since." She stopped, swallowed. Every step. He turned to face her, and she saw understanding in his eyes. "How long for you?" "6 months. "Gets easier," he said quietly. "Not easy, but easier." They stood there for a moment, two people carved hollow by loss, finding an unexpected kinship in their shared grief. Then Calloway cleared his throat and stepped back. "I'll turn in if that's all right. Like to get an early start tomorrow." "Sunrise," Clara agreed. "I'll have breakfast ready by 5. He touched his hat brim and disappeared into the small room, closing the door softly behind him. Clara heard him moving quietly, settling his daughter more comfortably, speaking to her in low, gentle tones, though she likely couldn't hear. Alone again, Clara banked the fire and prepared for bed. But sleep felt far away. Instead, she stood by her window looking out at the barn, the corral, the endless sweep of land that had once felt like a promise and now felt like a burden. Tomorrow would tell whether she'd made a wise choice or a foolish one. But tonight, for the first time in months, the cabin didn't echo with emptiness. Somewhere in the darkness, a child slept safely, and a father kept watch. It wasn't her family might never be, but it was life, stubborn and persistent, refusing to be driven away by grief or hardship. The snow had stopped, and stars began to show through the breaking clouds. Clara touched the glass briefly, thinking of William, wondering what he'd make of her decision. Then she turned away and made ready for bed. Tomorrow would come soon enough, bringing with it all the challenges of keeping a ranch alive in unforgiving country. But tonight, she wasn't facing it alone. The smell of coffee and frying bacon pulled Ethan from sleep before dawn. For a moment, he lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling and the soft breathing of his daughter beside him. Then memory returned. The widow's kindness, the warm meal, the promise of work. He rose carefully, not wanting to wake Sarah, and pulled on his boots. In the main room, Clara was already at the stove, her movements efficient and practiced. She'd changed into a work dress and apron, her honey-colored hair neatly pinned. The table was set for 3. "Morning," she said without turning. "Coffee's ready. Breakfast will be another few minutes." Ethan poured himself a cup, savoring the warmth and the rich aroma. Real coffee had been a luxury these past months, rationed carefully when they could afford it at all. "I can start on chores while you finish," he offered. "Eat first. You'll need it." She glanced back at him. "Your daughter's still sleeping." "Like a stone." "First real bed she's had in weeks." Clara nodded and returned to her cooking. They worked in companionable silence until Sarah appeared in the doorway, clutching her doll and rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Papa." Her voice was small, uncertain. "Right here. Sunshine." Ethan held out his arms, and she ran to him, burying her face in his shirt. "You hungry?" he asked, and she nodded against his chest, then peeked shyly at Clara. In the morning light, the child looked even more fragile than she had the night before, her dress hanging loose on her thin frame. "Good morning, Sarah," Clara said gently. "Would you like some milk with your breakfast?" The girl's eyes widened. "Real milk, fresh from the cow this morning." Sarah looked up at her father as if seeking permission for such luxury. At his nod, she whispered, "Yes, please, ma'am." They sat down to a breakfast of bacon biscuits and fried eggs. Ethan noticed how Clara watched Sarah eat, a soft concern in her eyes, when the child carefully saved half her biscuit in her pocket. "There's plenty more," Clara said quietly. "You don't need to save it." Sarah flushed and looked down. "Mama always said not to waste." "Your mama was right," Clara agreed. "But there's a difference between not wasting and going hungry. In this house, you eat until you're full." After breakfast, Ethan prepared to start work, but Sarah clung to his hand. "Where are you going, Papa?" "Just outside to help Mrs. Clara with the ranch. You'll be able to see me from the window." "Can't I come?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and Ethan felt the familiar pang of guilt. Since Rebecca's death, his daughter had become his shadow, terrified of being separated from him. Clara, seeming to sense the tension, spoke up. "The henhouse needs checking for eggs. Think you could help me with that while your papa tends the horses?" Sarah bit her lip, clearly torn between staying close to her father and the novelty of gathering eggs. Curiosity won. "I could help," she offered tentatively. As they stepped outside into the crisp morning air, Ethan got his first real look at the Sullivan Ranch in daylight. The main buildings were sound, but everywhere he saw signs of deferred maintenance, fence posts, leaning gates, hanging crooked equipment in need of repair. A ranch this size was too much for one person, especially with winter approaching. "I'll start with the corral fence," he told Clara. "That corner section won't last another storm." She studied him for a moment, as if taking his measure. "Tools are in the barn. You'll find what you need." They separated Clara, leading Sarah toward the hen house, while Ethan headed for the barn. As he worked, he kept one eye on the pair, watching as Clara patiently showed his daughter how to check for eggs without disturbing the hens. Sarah's delighted gasp when the first hen yielded a warm egg carried across the yard, and Ethan felt something ease in his chest. It had been too long since he'd heard that sound. The work was hard, but satisfying. As the sun climbed higher, Ethan lost himself in the rhythm of it, measuring, cutting, hammering. His hands remembered this dance even after months of wandering. From time to time he glanced toward the house, catching glimpses of Sarah following Clara like a small shadow. Near midday they converged at the water pump. Sarah's dress was dusty, but her face glowed with excitement. "Papa, I collected 12 eggs, and Mrs. Clara showed me how to scatter corn for the chickens. And there's a cat in the barn with kittens. Sounds like you've been busy." He ruffled her hair, his heart lifting at her enthusiasm. It had been too long since he'd seen her truly smile. "The gray tabby had her litter 2 weeks ago," Clara explained. 5 kittens, all healthy." "Can I see them again after lunch?" Sarah asked hopefully. "If your father says it's all right." Ethan nodded, grateful for the distraction. Keeping Sarah occupied while he worked had been one of his constant worries on the road. Lunch was a simple affair. Cold beef, bread, and preserves eaten at the kitchen table. Clara had a map spread out beside her plate, marking water sources and grazing areas. "The north pasture is best for wintering," she explained, tracing the boundaries with her finger. "Samuel always said—" She stopped abruptly, her hand stilling. "Your husband knew the land well," Ethan said carefully. "He did." Her voice was steady, but he saw the effort it cost her. "Bought this place 8 years ago with nothing but dreams and determination. Built it up from scrubland to what you see now. He'd be proud you're keeping it going." Clara's laugh was short and bitter. "Keeping it going, I'm barely holding on. Half the town expects me to sell before first snow." "Will you—" She met his eyes squarely. "Not if I can help it." After lunch, Sarah curled up on the hearth rug, with one of the kittens Clara had allowed her to bring inside. The doll sat forgotten as she gently stroked the tiny creature, whispering secrets into its fur. Watching her, Clara felt that crack in her chest widen. "Does she remember her mother well?" she asked quietly. Ethan paused in cleaning his tools, some days more than others. The doll was Rebecca's, made it for Sadie's 4th birthday. He smiled sadly. "She talks to it sometimes, tells it things she can't tell me. Children need their secrets. That they do." He was quiet for a moment. "Your husband, were there children?" "No." The word came out harder than she intended. "We tried for years, but the land doesn't give up its gifts easily out here." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Can't mourn what never was." But her eyes lingered on Sarah, betraying the lie in her words. The afternoon brought new challenges. While checking the barn, Ethan discovered several boards rotting in the hayloft floor, dangerous for anyone who didn't know to avoid them. The chicken coop door barely hung on its hinges, and the tool handles were loose, neglected since spring. He made a mental list as he worked, prioritizing what needed immediate attention versus what could wait. By evening, he'd repaired the worst of the corral fence and rehung the coop door. His shoulders ached pleasantly, the kind of tiredness that came from honest work. Supper was a livelier affair than breakfast. Sarah chattered about her day, the kittens, the chickens, the pretty blue curtains in the kitchen window. She'd lost some of her initial shyness, addressing Clara directly now instead of hiding behind her father. "Mrs. Clara, do you know any stories?" she asked suddenly. "What kind of stories? Mama used to tell me about princes and castles." Her face fell slightly. "But I can't remember them all anymore." Clara considered. "I don't know many castle stories, but my grandmother used to tell me about the old days when the frontier was even wilder than now. Would you like to hear about the time she faced down a bear with nothing but a rolling pin?" Sarah's eyes went round. "Really? Really?" She was making pies for a church social when this big, black bear came sniffing around her kitchen. As Clara spun the tale, Ethan watched the two of them across the table. His daughter hung on every word, gasping at the dangerous parts and giggling when Clara described her grandmother chasing the bear with flour-covered hands. It was the most animated he'd seen Sarah since Rebecca's death. When the story ended, Sarah yawned hugely. "That was better than castles." "Time for bed, sunshine," Ethan said, seeing her eyelids drooping. "Will you tell another story tomorrow, Mrs. Clara?" Sarah asked sleepily. "If you'd like." As Ethan carried his drowsy daughter to their room, he heard her murmur, "She's nice, Papa. Not mean like Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house?" "No," he agreed softly. "She's not." When he returned to help with the dishes, Clara waved him off. "You've done enough today. Besides, we need to discuss tomorrow's work." They sat by the fire and she outlined the immediate needs, bringing the cattle down from summer pasture, checking the winter feed supply, reinforcing the barn before the first heavy snow. "It's a lot," she admitted. "Maybe too much." "It's manageable," Ethan countered. "But you'll need more than one hand come spring. This place could support a full crew." "Could have," she corrected. "When William was alive, we had plans." She shook her head. "Doesn't matter now. I'll be lucky to keep it running through winter." "Why stay?" Ethan asked. "Must be easier places for a woman alone." Clara stared into the fire. "You ever build something with your own hands, Mr. Calloway? Pour your sweat and blood and dreams into every fence post, every acre." "I have." "Then you know why I can't leave. This land has pieces of us in it, William and me. Selling would be like—" She paused, searching for words. "Like selling his grave." They sat quietly listening to the fire pop and the wind rise outside. Finally, Ethan stood. Better get some rest. Long day tomorrow. Mr. Calloway. She looked up at him. Ethan. He paused, one hand on the door to the small room. Thank you for the work today, but also, it was good to hear laughter in this house again. Thank you for giving us the chance. As he prepared for bed, Ethan reflected on the day. He'd worked harder ranches and faced tougher bosses. But something about this place, these two souls nursing their private griefs while building something together, felt different, fragile and precious like the first green shoots after a hard winter. In her bed, Sarah stirred. Papa. Yes, sunshine. Do you think Mama can see us from heaven? His throat tightened. I'm sure she can. Good. I want her to know we found a nice place with kittens and stories and everything. I think she knows. Sarah settled back into sleep, one small hand reaching out to touch his arm, as if reassuring herself he was still there. Ethan lay awake longer, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house, settling the distant howl of coyotes, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. Through the thin wall, he could hear Clara moving about, banking the fire, checking the locks. The sounds of someone ending their day alone as she had too many nights before. But tonight was different. Tonight the house held more than one lonely soul. Perhaps that was enough. Not healing, not yet, but the first step toward it. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But for now, they were safe, fed, and sheltered on the frontier. Sometimes, that was all the miracle you could ask for. The first week passed in a blur of dawn to dusk labor. Each morning, Ethan rose before the sun, finding coffee already brewing, and Clara bent over her ledgers, calculating feed costs against dwindling funds. He'd grown accustomed to her quiet efficiency, the way she moved through tasks with an economy born of necessity. What surprised him more each day was her patience with Sarah. The child had blossomed under Clara's gentle attention, following her about the house like a devoted puppy. Where once she'd been silent and withdrawn, now she chattered freely, helping with simple chores and absorbing every scrap of knowledge Clara offered. See how I'm holding the needle, Clara demonstrated one evening, showing Sarah how to mend a torn apron. Small stitches close together. That's what keeps the fabric strong. Sarah's tongue poked out in concentration as she tried to copy the movements. Like this, just like that. You're a natural. Ethan watched from across the room, pretending to oil a harness, while his heart swelled at the sight. Rebecca had always intended to teach their daughter such things, but illness had stolen that chance. Now here was Clara, filling that void, without being asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The next morning brought the real test of his skills. 300 head of cattle needed moving from the high summer pastures before the weather turned. It was a job that typically required 3 or 4 men. We'll have to do it in stages, Clara said, studying the terrain from horseback. Bring them down in groups of 50 or so. I have another idea, Ethan said. Sarah's been riding since she could walk. She's small, but she knows how to work cattle. Clara looked skeptical. She's just a child. Out here, children learn fast, or they don't survive. He softened his tone. I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't think she could handle it. She needs to feel useful, not just tag along. After a long moment, Clara nodded. If you think it's safe? When they told Sarah, her face lit up like Christmas morning. Really, Papa, I can help with the real work. Real work means real responsibility, he warned. You listen to everything Mrs. Clara and I say, understand. Yes, Papa. They saddled 3 horses, Clara finding an old youth saddle in the barn that fit Sarah perfectly. As they rode out, Ethan felt a familiar rhythm return to his bones, the creak of leather, the sway of his mount. The vast sky stretched overhead. This was the life he knew, the life he'd tried to build with Rebecca before fever took her away. The cattle were scattered across a high meadow grown fat and lazy on summer grass. At Ethan's direction, they spread out. He took the left flank, Clara the right, and Sarah stayed in the middle as sweep rider. "Remember, sunshine," he called to his daughter. "Steady and calm. The cattle feel what you feel." What followed was a dance as old as the West itself. They moved slowly at first, letting the cattle get used to their presence. Then, with subtle pressure, they began guiding the herd downslope toward the winter pastures. Sarah proved her worth quickly, anticipating which animals might break from the group and moving to block them before they could scatter. "She's got good instincts," Clara commented when they paused to rest the horses. "Her mother's gift," Ethan said. "Rebecca could gentle the wildest horse just by talking to it." They worked through the day, bringing down group after group. By late afternoon, they'd moved over half the herd to the lower pastures. Sarah had grown quieter as the hours passed, but she never complained, never asked to stop. "That's enough for today," Clara finally declared. "We'll get the rest tomorrow." As they rode back, Ethan noticed his daughter swaying slightly in her saddle. Without a word, he moved his horse closer, ready to catch her, if needed, but she straightened, gripping the reins with determined hands. "Did I do good, Papa?" she asked, as they unsaddled the horses. "You did better than good. You did professional work today." Clara appeared with a cup of water. "Professional workers get paid," she said seriously, then pressed a silver dollar into Sarah's palm. "Fair wages for fair work." Sarah stared at the coin as if it were magical. "My very own dollar. Your very own. You earned it." That night, Sarah could barely keep her eyes open through supper, but she clutched her dollar tight, occasionally pulling it out to admire it in the lamplight. "What will you do with your wages?" Clara asked. "Save it," Sarah said promptly. "Papa says saving is important." "Smart girl, though it's also good to buy something special sometimes. Something just for you." After Sarah had been carried to bed, exhausted but happy, Ethan found Clara on the porch watching the stars emerge. "You didn't have to pay her," he said, joining her on the bench. "Yes, I did. She worked as hard as any hand I've hired, harder than some." She paused. "Children need to know their worth, especially girls. Too many grow up thinking they're only good for what others give them, not what they earn themselves. Speaking from experience, my father was a good man but old-fashioned. Thought teaching me to read was enough education for any woman." Her smile was rueful. "William had to teach me numbers and accounting after we married. Said a rancher's wife needed to know the business as well as any man." Sounds like he was ahead of his time. "He was ahead of mine, that's certain." She pulled her shawl closer. "I fought him on it at first. Thought he was criticizing my father's judgment. Took me time to realize he was trying to make sure I'd never be helpless." "Good man. The best." The words came out fierce, protective, then softer. "Though he'd have liked your daughter. Always said the ranch needed children's laughter." They sat in comfortable silence, watching bats dart through the darkness. Inside, Ethan could see the warm glow of the fire through the window, the home-like comfort of it, how quickly they'd fallen into rhythms together. Work and meals, stories, and quiet evenings, like a family, almost, though he didn't dare name it such. The next days brought more of the same. They finished moving the cattle, Sarah growing more confident with each passing hour. She'd taken to wearing her dollar on a string around her neck, tucked safely beneath her dress, but touched often, as if to reassure herself it was real. One afternoon, while Ethan repaired harnesses in the barn, he heard laughter from the house. Real, delighted laughter from both Clara and his daughter. He paused in his work, letting the sound wash over him. When was the last time he'd heard Sarah laugh like that? Not since before Rebecca took sick, surely. He found them in the kitchen flour dusting every surface and both their faces. "Papa," Sarah cried, "we're making bread, real bread, not hardtack. I can see that," he said, taking in the chaos. "Looks like the flour is winning." "Bread is a battle," Clara said solemnly, a streak of flour across her cheek. "Sometimes you win, sometimes the dough does." They showed him how to knead properly, Sarah's small hands working alongside Clara's stronger ones. The kitchen filled with warmth and the yeasty smell of rising dough. And for a moment, Ethan forgot about loss and wandering and the uncertain future. There was only this: his daughter's joy, Clara's patient teaching the simple pleasure of creating something nurturing with their own hands. That evening, as they ate the still warm bread with butter and honey, Sarah declared it the best she'd ever tasted. "Because we made it together," she said matter-of-factly. "Things are always better when you make them with people you—" She stopped suddenly, shy glancing between her father and Clara. "With people you care about," Clara finished gently. "Yes, they are." Later, as Ethan tucked his daughter into bed, she asked, "Papa, are we staying here forever?" The question he'd been dreading. "I don't know, sunshine. We're here for now, and that's what matters." "I want to stay," she said firmly. "Mrs. Clara needs us, and we need her too, don't we?" From the mouths of babes, Ethan thought. Sleep now. Tomorrow's another big day. But Sarah wasn't finished. "Papa, do you think Mama would like Mrs. Clara?" His throat tightened. "I think she would very much." "Good, because I like her too. She doesn't try to be Mama, but she's teaching me things Mama would have wanted me to know." She yawned. "That's good, isn't it? That's very good, sunshine." As he returned to the main room, he found Clara mending one of Sarah's dresses, adding length to the hem with careful stitches. "She's growing," she said without looking up. "Children do that even when times are hard." "Clara." He stopped, unsure what he wanted to say. Thank you seemed insufficient. The past week had shown him something he'd thought lost forever, the possibility of home, of belonging somewhere again. She looked up then, seeming to read his struggle. "I know," she said simply. "I feel it too. What do we do about it?" "We take each day as it comes. Winter's bearing down and there's work to be done. The rest," she returned to her sewing, "the rest will sort itself out, or it won't." Practical words, but her hands trembled slightly on the fabric. Ethan understood. They were both walking wounded, careful of hoping for too much, too soon. But something was building between the three of them, fragile as first ice, but growing stronger each day. "I'll bring in more firewood," he said, needing action to calm his thoughts. Outside, the stars sprawled across the sky in wild abundance. He could hear cattle lowing and the near pasture horses shifting in the barn. His daughter slept safe and warm, her belly full, learning and growing under a good woman's care. He had work that mattered, wages fairly earned, and the respect of someone he'd come to admire more each day. It wasn't the life he'd planned with Rebecca, but it was a life nonetheless. And for the first time since her death, that felt like enough. When he returned with the wood, Clara had set aside the mending and was writing in her ledger. She looked up as he entered, and something passed between them. Not a promise, not yet, but an acknowledgement of possibility. "Ethan," she said, and he realized it was the first time she'd used his given name without the formal Mr. attached. "I'm glad you knocked on my door that night." "So am I," he replied, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "So am I." The morning Victor Harrington's man came started like any other. Frost silvered the grass, and Ethan was already in the barn mucking stalls while Sarah scattered feed for the chickens. Clara had just stepped onto the porch with her coffee when she spotted the riders approaching. 3 men moving with the deliberate pace of those who wanted to be seen coming. "Ethan," she called, keeping her voice steady, despite the unease crawling up her spine. He emerged from the barn, pitchfork in hand, and followed her gaze. His expression darkened. "Sarah, go inside." "But, Papa, I haven't finished." "Inside now." Something in his tone made the child obey without further protest. She scurried past Clara, who touched her shoulder reassuringly before the door closed. The riders stopped just outside the fence. The man in front was big with pale eyes and a scar that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer. His companions looked like hired muscle, the kind who enjoyed their work too much. "Mrs. Sullivan," the scarred man said, touching his hat in a mockery of politeness. "Caleb Mercer, representing Mr. Victor Harrington's interests." "I know who you are," Clara replied coldly. "State your business." Mercer's gaze slid to Ethan, who'd moved to stand beside her. "Hired yourself a new hand, I see. Bit soon after your husband's passing, isn't it? My employment arrangements are none of your concern." "Everything on this range is Mr. Harrington's concern." Mercer dismounted his men, following suit. "Especially when your cattle keep wandering onto his land. Found near a dozen head with your brand grazing at Willow Creek yesterday." Clara stiffened at the mention of Willow Creek, the same place William had mentioned in his unfinished letter. "That's impossible," she said. "We moved all the cattle to the lower pastures last week." "You calling me a liar, Mrs. Sullivan?" Ethan stepped forward. "She's saying you're mistaken. Easy enough to verify. Why don't you show us these strays?" Mercer's eyes narrowed as he studied Ethan. Something flickered across his face, not quite recognition, but a wary assessment. Professional gunmen had a way of recognizing their own kind. "Cattle cross property lines," Ethan continued calmly. "It happens. We'll ride out today, check the fences, bring back any strays. No harm done." "No harm?" Mercer laughed an ugly sound. "Mr. Harrington's patience is wearing thin. This is the 3rd time this year. He's thinking maybe Mrs. Sullivan can't manage a ranch this size, thinking maybe she'd be better off selling to someone who can." "I'm not selling," Clara said firmly. "Not ever." Mercer's smile was all teeth. "But winter's coming. Accidents happen. Cattle die, barns burn. Terrible, dangerous ranching alone." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Ethan's hand had drifted closer to his hip, though he wore no gun. "That sounds like a threat, Mr. Mercer," Clara said. "Just observing the hazards of frontier life, ma'am." His gaze lingered on the house, where Sarah's face appeared briefly at the window. "Especially with a child about. Dangerous country for little ones." Ethan went very still. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to something soft and lethal. "You're right. It is dangerous country. Men disappear out here all the time. Fall off their horses in the dark, get lost in snowstorms. Sometimes they threaten the wrong people and just vanish." Mercer's hand moved toward his gun, but stopped when Ethan smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Of course, you're just here about cattle. Neighborly concern. We appreciate that." Ethan's tone had returned to pleasant, but his eyes remained cold. "Tell Mr. Harrington we'll check our fences today. Any strays will be returned promptly." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Mercer stepped back, something like respect flickering in his pale eyes. "See that they are, Mr. Harrington's generosity has limits." They mounted and rode off, but Mercer turned back once his gaze finding Ethan. "You look familiar, friend. We met before." "Doubt it? I'm just a drifter working for wages." "Funny. You don't sit a horse like a drifter. Mercer wheeled his mount around. I'll be seeing you. After they'd gone, Clara realized she was shaking. Ethan gently took her elbow and guided her inside where Sarah waited anxiously. Who were those men, Papa? Nobody important, sunshine. Why don't you go check on the kittens? When she'd gone, Clara sank into a chair. He threatened Sarah. He threatened all of us. Ethan poured her coffee with steady hands, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Tell me about Harrington. Victor Harrington owns the biggest spread in the territory. 3,000 head, maybe more. He's been buying up smaller ranches for years by whatever means necessary. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup. William always said Harrington had his eye on our water rights. We've got the best year-round stream for miles. And now, with William gone, he figures I'm easy pickings. You've had offers. Generous ones, or so they seemed. When I refused, she gestured toward the door. The visits started. Little things at first. Cut fences, scattered cattle. Nothing I could prove. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Mercer recognized something in me. He's not wrong. He stared into his coffee. I wasn't always a rancher. Clara waited, sensing the weight of what he was about to share. I was a lawman once, deputy marshal in Colorado before Sarah was born. Good at it, too. Maybe too good. His voice grew distant. Made enemies. One of them came for me at home. He swallowed hard. Rebecca was alone with the baby. Got between them and the gun. By the time I got there, oh, Ethan, I killed him. The man who shot her. Killed him and felt nothing but empty. Turned in my badge the next day. Took Sarah and left. His knuckles were white around his coffee cup. Been running ever since, I suppose. Running from what I was, what I did. Clara reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. You protected your family. There's no shame in that. Didn't protect them well enough. He turned his hand palm up, interlacing their fingers. But I won't make that mistake again. If Harrington wants this ranch, he'll have to go through me. This isn't your fight. Isn't it? He squeezed her hand gently. Sarah hasn't smiled in months before we came here. She's learning, growing, being a child again. You did that. You gave her back something I couldn't. You think I'll let anyone threaten that? They sat in silence, hands clasped across the table. Finally, Clara spoke. What do we do? First, we check those fences like I promised. Then we prepare. Harrington's type doesn't give up easy, but they're also careful. He'll probe for weakness before he commits to real violence. Ethan's smile was grim. Lucky for us, I know how men like him think. They spent the day riding the property lines. As Ethan had suspected, the fences were intact. No sign of tampering, but they found tracks. Horsemen who'd driven a small group of cattle across the boundary, then back again, leaving just enough evidence to support Mercer's claim. Clever, Ethan admitted. Make it look like negligence on our part. William always said Harrington was patient as a spider. They repaired a few weak spots in the fence, more to show they'd taken the complaint seriously than from real need. As they worked, Ethan found himself watching Clara, the competent way she handled tools and horse alike. She'd grown into this life shaped by its demands, but not broken by them. That evening, as Sarah played with the kittens in the barn, Ethan cleaned his rifle and the old Colt he'd found in the tack room still in working order. Clara watched from the doorway. I hate this, she said quietly. The fear, the waiting for something bad to happen. William tried to shield me from it, but I always knew it was there. It's the way of things out here. The strong take from the weak. Unless the weak get smart, or lucky, or both. Which are we? He asked. She looked up at him, backlit by the setting sun. We're not weak. Not anymore. That night, Ethan moved his bedroll to the main room, positioning himself between the door and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. If trouble came calling, it would find him first. Sarah, sensing the tension despite their efforts to hide it, was reluctant to go to bed. "Papa, are the bad men coming back?" "Maybe, but you don't need to worry about that." "Why not?" He smoothed her hair back from her face. "Because that's my job. Your job is to sleep tight and have good dreams." "Will you protect Mrs. Clara, too?" "I'll protect everyone in this house." She considered this. "Good, because I think she's our family now." "Isn't she?" Ethan's throat tightened. From the hallway, he heard Clara's quick intake of breath. "What makes you say that, Sunshine? She takes care of us. We take care of her. That's what families do." Sarah yawned. "Mama would understand. She always said hearts got bigger with more people to love, not smaller." After she'd fallen asleep, Ethan found Clara standing by the window, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "She's right, you know," Clara whispered. "Somewhere between that first night and now you both became essential." She turned to face him. "I've been so afraid of dishonoring William's memory by moving on, but I think he'd hate seeing me alone more than anything else. He always said I had too much love for just one person anyway." Ethan crossed to her, cupping her face gently, thumbing away the tears. "We're a matched set, you and I, both trying to figure out how to live again after loss. Maybe we can figure it out together. Even with Harrington and his threats, especially with that, nothing worth having comes easy out here." She leaned into his touch. "Promise me something. Whatever happens, we protect Sarah first. She's innocent in all this. I promise. But I'm going to protect you both, or die trying." "Don't you dare die," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare leave us now that we've found you." He pulled her close, and she came willingly, fitting against him like she belonged there. They stood together in the darkness, drawing strength from each other, while outside the wind rose, carrying with it the scent of coming snow and the promise of harder days ahead. But for now, they were together, a makeshift family forged from loss and need, and the stubborn hope that refused to die even in the hardest ground. Whatever Harrington sent their way, they'd face it together. In the barn, a kitten mewed in its bed. Sarah smiled in her sleep, and in the main room, two wounded souls held each other and began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd found their way home. A week passed, then another. The rhythm of ranch life settled around them like a comfortable blanket. Morning chores, afternoon work evenings, spent by the fire. With Ethan's help, Clara's ranch began to look less neglected. Fences stood straight, the barn roof no longer leaked, and the chicken coop had a door that closed properly. But despite these small victories, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Harrington was merely biding his time, like a predator watching from the shadows. One crisp morning, as Clara was checking her dwindling supplies in the root cellar, she heard the sound of an approaching wagon. She emerged to find a man standing in her yard, surveying the property with a critical eye. For a moment, she didn't recognize him, but then he turned, and her heart stuttered. "Thomas?" Thomas Sullivan removed his hat, revealing the same golden hair William had once had, though cut shorter. "Hello, Clara." She hadn't seen her brother-in-law in 7 years, not since he'd left after a bitter argument with William. The brothers had been as different as two men could be. William steady and rooted to the land, Thomas restless and drawn to adventure. "What are you doing here?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Heard about William. Came as soon as I could." Thomas glanced around. "You're still running the place, I see." Trying to. He nodded, then looked past her as Ethan emerged from the barn, Sarah trailing behind him like a shadow. "Didn't know you had company," Thomas said, his voice carefully neutral. "Mr. Calloway works for me." Clara's tone made it clear she didn't owe any further explanation. "Sarah is his daughter." Thomas stepped forward, extending his hand to Ethan. "Thomas Sullivan, William's brother." Ethan shook it, his grip firm. "Ethan Calloway." "Papa?" Sarah whispered. "Is this Mrs. Clara's family?" The innocent question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Clara felt her cheeks warm. "Yes, sunshine," Ethan answered. "This is Mrs. Clara's brother-in-law." Thomas squatted down to Sarah's level. "That means I was her husband's brother. Which sort of makes me family, I suppose." He smiled, a flash of charm that Clara remembered from years ago. "And who might you be?" "Sarah Calloway," the child replied, still half hidden behind her father's leg. "I'm 8. 8 is a fine age," Thomas said seriously. "I remember when I was 8. Got into all sorts of trouble." Sarah giggled, relaxing slightly. Clara watched the exchange with mixed emotions. Thomas had always been good with children, one of the few traits he and William had shared. But his sudden appearance after 7 years of silence raised too many questions. "Sarah, why don't you go collect the eggs?" Clara suggested. "I'm sure Thomas would like some breakfast after his journey." Once the child was out of earshot, Clara turned to her brother-in-law. 7 years without a word, Thomas. Not even for the funeral." "I didn't know about the funeral," he said quietly. "I was in California. News travels slow." "And what brings you back now?" Thomas glanced at Ethan, clearly reluctant to speak freely in front of a stranger. "Mr. Calloway has my complete trust," Clara said, reading his hesitation. Thomas nodded. "I need to talk to you about William, about how he died." A chill ran through Clara that had nothing to do with the morning air. "William died of a fever. The doctor said the doctor was wrong, or lying." Thomas's voice was hard. "William was murdered, Clara, and I think I know why." They sat around Clara's kitchen table, coffee growing cold in their cups. Thomas had spread out several maps and documents, including land deeds and water rights filings. "William wrote to me 6 months ago," Thomas explained. "Said he'd discovered something about Harrington's operations, something illegal. He wrote to you." Clara couldn't keep the hurt from her voice. William had shared his suspicions with his estranged brother, but not with her. "We'd been corresponding for about a year by then, trying to mend things." Thomas's eyes held genuine regret. "He didn't want to worry you until he had proof." "Proof of what?" Ethan asked. "Water theft, essentially. Harrington has been systematically diverting streams and springs from their natural courses. Look here." Thomas pointed to one of the maps. "Willow Creek should flow through these 3 properties before joining the main river. But over the last 2 years, all 3 ranches have reported their sections of the creek drying up. And all 3 ranches have since been sold to Harrington," Clara said slowly, the pieces falling into place. "Exactly. First he cuts off their water, making the land nearly worthless. Then he swoops in with an offer they can't refuse because no one else would buy land without water." "But that's illegal," Clara protested. "Water rights in the territory are clearly established. That's what William was trying to prove. He found evidence of Harrington's men building dams and diversion channels on public land. That's federal property, a federal crime." Clara's mind went to the unfinished letter in her desk drawer. "If anything happens to me, don't trust Harrington. I've discovered what they're doing at Willow Creek." Now it made sense. "You think Harrington had him killed because of this?" Ethan asked. Thomas nodded grimly. William told me he was gathering evidence to take to the territorial governor. Then suddenly, he's dead from a mysterious fever that came on overnight. Doesn't that strike you as convenient? Clara felt sick. She remembered William's last days, the sudden onset of violent illness, his delirious ramblings about water and poison, the doctor's vague diagnosis. At the time, grief had clouded her judgment, made her accept explanations that now seemed suspicious. "Why come back now?" Ethan asked, his tone not accusatory, but cautious. "Why not when your brother first wrote to you, 'I was working a claim in California'? Didn't get his letter until weeks after he sent it. By the time I replied, he was already dead." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like William's that Clara's heart ached. "I've spent months tracing Harrington's operations, talking to former ranch owners who lost their land. I needed evidence before I came to you with this." "And do you have evidence?" Clara asked. "Some. Not enough yet to bring down Harrington, but enough to continue what William started." Clara stood abruptly, moving to the window. Outside, she could see Sarah carefully carrying a basket of eggs back from the henhouse. The morning sun caught in her dark hair, turning it to copper. In just 2 weeks, the child had become precious to her, as had her father. "You've brought danger to my door, Thomas," she said quietly. "The danger was already here, Clara. Harrington won't stop until he has your water. This ranch sits at the headwaters of 3 different streams. Whoever controls it controls the water for half the valley." Ethan spoke up. "Does Harrington know you're investigating him?" Thomas shrugged. "I've been careful, but in a territory this size, word gets around. Wouldn't surprise me if he's heard rumors." "Then we need to be prepared," Ethan said. "He'll see your arrival as a threat. Might force his hand." Clara turned back to face them. "I won't give up this ranch. William built it from nothing. It's all I have left of him." "No one's asking you to give it up," Thomas said. "I'm asking you to help me fight for it, for justice for William." Clara studied her brother-in-law, searching for the reckless young man who'd stormed out after that final argument with William. She saw instead a man tempered by time and grief, with the same stubborn Sullivan determination in his jaw. "What do you need from me?" she asked finally. "Access to William's papers, permission to stay and continue investigating, and," he glanced at Ethan, "someone I can trust to watch my back." Clara looked at Ethan, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded almost imperceptibly. "You can stay in the bunkhouse," she decided. "It hasn't been used since William let the last hands go, but it's sound." "Thank you, Clara." Thomas gathered his maps. "There's one more thing you should know. William kept a journal. In his last letter, he mentioned hiding important evidence in it. Have you seen it?" "I have his journal," Clara admitted, "but I've never found anything hidden in it." "Maybe you weren't looking for it," Thomas suggested. "Mind if I take a look?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "After supper. There are chores to be done first, and Sarah will have questions about our visitor." As if summoned by her name, Sarah burst through the door, proudly holding her basket of eggs. "I found 12, Mrs. Clara, and one was still warm. Well done." Clara smiled, grateful for the child's innocent enthusiasm in the midst of such grave conversations. "Why don't you show Mr. Thomas how carefully you can put them away?" As Sarah chattered excitedly to Thomas about the chickens and the kittens and everything else she'd discovered on the ranch, Clara caught Ethan's eye. His gaze was steady, reassuring. Whatever came next, they would face it together. For now, that would have to be enough. Cheese! Sheriff Daniel Foster hated the cold. 15 years in Montana hadn't changed that. Every winter, his old war wound ached deep in the bone, a reminder of a battlefield far away, and a bullet that had nearly taken his life. Today, the pain was particularly sharp as he rode toward the Sullivan Ranch. Foster had been fond of William Sullivan, as fond as his reserved nature allowed him to be of anyone. William had been honest, hard-working, the kind of man who made this harsh territory livable through sheer determination. His death had hit the community hard, especially coming so suddenly. But it was Clara who occupied Foster's thoughts as he approached the ranch. Clara, with her quiet strength and those green eyes that saw too much. He'd watched over her these past months as best he could, making excuses to ride by the property, offering help she invariably refused with polite gratitude. Pride, he thought. Too much pride for her own good. When the ranch house came into view, Foster noticed the extra horses in the corral. Visitors were unusual this time of year, with winter closing in. His instincts, honed by years as a lawman, prickled with unease. He dismounted in the yard, removed his hat, and rapped on the door. It opened to reveal Clara, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sheriff Foster," she said, surprised. "What brings you out this way?" "Just making my rounds, Mrs. Sullivan." He tried not to notice how the afternoon light caught in her honey-colored hair. "Thought I'd check in, what with winter coming on." "That's thoughtful of you. Would you like some coffee?" "That'd be welcome." Inside the cabin was warmer than he expected, the fire burning bright in the hearth. A man Foster didn't recognize sat at the table cleaning a rifle with practiced ease. He looked up as they entered, his eyes assessing Foster in a way that spoke of experience with lawmen, and not necessarily good experience. "Sheriff, this is Ethan Calloway," Clara introduced. "He's been helping with the ranch these past weeks." Calloway stood, extending his hand. "Sheriff?" Foster shook it, noting the calluses and the strength of the grip. "Mr. Calloway, and I believe you know Thomas." Clara gestured to the other side of the room, where another man sat with a small girl showing her how to play checkers. Foster stiffened. "Thomas Sullivan. Didn't know you were back in the territory." Thomas rose, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Sheriff Foster. Still wearing that badge, I see." "Still upholding the law," Foster replied evenly. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Clara, sensing it, quickly poured coffee and set a cup before Foster. "Sarah," she said to the little girl, "why don't you help me get some cookies for our guest?" The child, Calloway's daughter Foster presumed, followed Clara to the kitchen area, leaving the three men in uneasy silence. "How long are you planning to stay, Sullivan?" Foster asked finally. "As long as needed," Thomas replied. "Family business." "Bit late for family business, isn't it? Your brother's been gone 6 months. Better late than never, wouldn't you say?" Foster's eyes narrowed. "Depends on the business." Before Thomas could respond, Clara returned with a plate of cookies, Sarah trailing behind her. "So, Sheriff," Clara said brightly, clearly trying to diffuse the tension, "what news from town?" Foster accepted the change of subject, though he kept one eye on Thomas. "Not much to report. Old man Jenkins finally fixed his wagon wheel. The widow Perkins is planning a Christmas social next month." He paused, then added casually, "Oh, and Victor Harrington's been asking about property lines again. Seems he's interested in expanding further north." Clara's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "Is that so? Mentioned your place specifically?" Foster watched her face carefully. "Said there might be some dispute over water rights." "There's no dispute," Clara said firmly. "The water on this property belongs to this ranch. William made sure all the paperwork was in order." "That's what I told him," Foster nodded. "But Harrington's not a man who likes to take no for an answer." Calloway spoke up. "You know Harrington well, Sheriff." "Well enough to steer clear when I can," Foster admitted. "Man's got influence with the territorial governor. Makes my job complicated sometimes. And what exactly is your job, Sheriff? Thomas asked, his tone just shy of insolent. Enforcing the law or looking the other way when it suits Harrington's interests? Thomas, Clara exclaimed. Foster set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. My job, Mr. Sullivan, is to keep the peace in this territory. Sometimes that means making hard choices about which battles to fight. Seems to me a lawman shouldn't have to choose which laws to enforce, Thomas replied. Foster stood, his patience worn thin. Thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Sullivan. I should be getting back to town. He settled his hat on his head, then looked directly at Clara. If you need anything at all, you send word. Clara walked him to the door. I'm sorry about Thomas, she said quietly. He's always been hot-headed. He's stirring up trouble, Clara, Foster warned, the kind of trouble that gets people hurt. He's just looking out for family. And is Calloway family too? The question came out more sharply than he'd intended. Clara's chin lifted. Mr. Calloway is my employee, and a good man who's helping me keep this ranch going. Not that it's any of your concern, Sheriff. Foster sighed. I'm not speaking as the sheriff right now, Clara. I'm speaking as someone who cared about William, who cares about you. Her expression softened slightly. I know Daniel, and I appreciate it, but I can manage my own affairs. Just be careful, he said, his voice low. Harrington has eyes everywhere. And now you've got a known troublemaker under your roof, plus a stranger with a past written all over him. You don't know anything about Ethan's past. Don't I? Foster raised an eyebrow. Man carries himself like a lawman or a gunslinger. Either way, he's seen violence. Clara didn't deny it, which told Foster all he needed to know. Just send word if there's trouble, he said finally. Day or night. As he mounted his horse, Foster glanced back at the house. Through the window he could see the four of them, Clara, Thomas, Calloway, and the little girl, gathered around the table. They looked like a family or some strange approximation of one. The thought twisted in his gut, like a knife. He'd waited too long after William's death, been too respectful of Clara's mourning. And now it might be too late. Foster turned his horse toward town, the old wound in his leg throbbing in time with his heartbeat. The snow would come soon, and with it isolation. Whatever was brewing at the Sullivan Ranch would have to play out without his interference. He just hoped Clara wouldn't pay the price for her brother-in-law's recklessness, or for taking in a man whose eyes held too many secrets. That night, after Sarah had been tucked into bed, Clara brought out William's journal. The three adults gathered around the kitchen table, the lamp casting long shadows across their faces. The journal was a simple leather-bound book, well worn from years of use. William had recorded everything in it: weather patterns, cattle counts, crop yields, expenses, and occasional personal reflections. Clara had read it many times since his death, finding comfort in his neat, precise handwriting. He wrote in it almost every day, she explained, passing it to Thomas. I've never found anything that looked like hidden evidence. Thomas turned the pages carefully. William was methodical. If he hid something, he'd have made it difficult to find, but not impossible. What exactly are we looking for? Ethan asked. Anything about water diversions, dam building, or Willow Creek, Thomas replied. Or any unusual activity on Harrington's land. They spent the next hour poring over the journal, reading entries from the months before William's death. Most were mundane ranch matters, but occasionally there were cryptic references. April 15th. Road to North Ridge. Observed H's men at the creek again. Something not right. May 3rd. Water level down again. Third time this month. Natural drought or human interference, May 17th. Met JM at Coleman's store. Says he's seen the same at Elk Valley. We'll investigate further. JM must be Jim Miller, Clara said. His ranch bordered Harrington's to the west. He sold out last spring and moved to Oregon. After his water mysteriously dried up, Thomas added, just like the others. Ethan leaned forward, studying an entry from June, just weeks before William's death. June 12th. Found it. The evidence we need. Not safe to write details here. RV has agreed to help document everything. Meeting again on Thursday. RV, Thomas muttered. Who's RV? Clara shook her head. I don't know. William knew so many people. Could be Rosa Vasquez, Ethan suggested. Miguel's sister. She works as a nurse for Doc Taylor. How do you know that? Clara asked, surprised. Sarah had a cough last week. I took her to town while you were checking the north pasture. Rosa gave her some syrup. Thomas flipped to the next entry, June 15th. Documentation secured. RV, will keep her copies safe. I've hidden mine where only Clara would think to look. If anything happens, the truth must come out. Where only Clara would think to look, Thomas repeated, looking up at his sister-in-law. Any ideas? Clara frowned, considering. He could have meant so many places. His desk, the barn, our bedroom. It would be somewhere significant to both of you, Ethan said quietly. Somewhere meaningful. Clara's eyes suddenly widened. The cottonwood? The what? Thomas asked. The big cottonwood tree by the stream. It's where William proposed to me, where we carved our initials 12 years ago. She stood abruptly. That has to be it. It's pitch dark outside, Ethan pointed out, and cold. We'll go at first light, Clara decided. If William hid something there, it's waited 6 months. It can wait one more night. As they prepared for bed, Clara noticed Ethan checking the doors and windows, his movements methodical and practiced. Do you think we're in danger? She asked softly, so Sarah wouldn't hear from the small room. Better safe than sorry, he replied. If William was killed for what he knew, and if Harrington suspects Thomas is continuing the investigation, he didn't need to finish the thought. Clara understood the implications all too well. I'll take the first watch, Thomas offered, settling into a chair by the window with William's rifle across his lap. Wake me in 4 hours, Ethan said. I'll take over till dawn. Clara looked between the two men. Her brother-in-law returned to seek justice for William, and Ethan, the stranger who had somehow become essential to her world in just 2 short weeks. Both willing to protect her, each for his own reasons. She touched Ethan's arm as she passed. Be careful, she whispered. Sarah needs you. His hand covered hers briefly. Get some rest, Clara. Tomorrow may be a long day. In her bedroom, Clara changed into her nightgown and sat on the edge of the bed, William's journal open on her lap. She traced his handwriting with her fingertip, remembering the man who had written these words, steady, thoughtful, determined to do what was right. If he had been murdered, as Thomas believed, then someone would have to answer for it. Justice would have to be served. But at what cost? Clara glanced toward the small room where Sarah slept, then thought of Ethan keeping watch in the main room. They had already lost so much. She couldn't bear to lose more. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the windows. Clara closed the journal and slid it under her pillow. Whatever William had hidden, they would find it tomorrow, and then they would decide what to do with the truth. She blew out the lamp and lay down, listening to the familiar creaks and groans of the house settling for the night. Despite her worries, exhaustion soon pulled her under into dreams of flowing water and whispered warnings. Tom, Dawn broke cold and clear, the frost glittering on the grass like scattered diamonds. Clara, Ethan, and Thomas set out for the cottonwood tree, leaving Sarah still asleep in the house. The tree stood alone by the stream that marked the eastern boundary of the ranch, a giant among the smaller trees that lined the water. Its massive trunk bore the scars of lightning strikes and harsh winters, yet it continued to thrive, a testament to resilience. There, Clara pointed to a spot about eye level on the trunk. That's where we carved our initials. Sure enough, the bark bore a faded heart, enclosing WS plus CS, and the date from 12 years earlier. Thomas ran his fingers over the carving. "Sentimental old fool," he murmured, but his voice held affection rather than mockery. "If he hid something here, where would it be?" Ethan asked, examining the area around the tree. Clara studied the massive trunk, thinking like William. He would have wanted it to be protected from the elements, and secure, not easily found by accident. She began circling the tree, her hands running over the rough bark. On the far side, facing away from the house, she found what she was looking for. A small, almost imperceptible seam in the trunk about 3 feet off the ground. "Here," she called. "This isn't natural." The men joined her. Ethan ran his finger along the seam, then pressed gently. A small section of bark swung inward, revealing a hollow in the trunk, a natural cavity that William had enlarged and disguised. Inside was a metal box, the kind used for storing important papers. Clara reached in and carefully withdrew it. The box was locked, but the key hung on a string beside it. "Clever," Thomas said admiringly. "Hidden in plain sight, but only if you knew where to look." With trembling hands, Clara unlocked the box. Inside were several folded papers, a small leather notebook, and a tin-type photograph. "What is all this?" she murmured, spreading the contents on a flat rock nearby. The papers proved to be maps similar to those Thomas had brought, but with detailed notations in William's handwriting. Locations of dams and diversion channels, dates of construction, names of witnesses. The notebook contained entries documenting conversations with former ranch owners who had sold to Harrington after their water sources mysteriously dried up. But it was the photograph that held Clara's attention. It showed Victor Harrington standing with several men beside a partially constructed dam. One of the men was Caleb Mercer. "This must be the evidence William mentioned," Thomas said, examining the maps. "Proof of water theft. And this," Ethan held up one of the papers, "is even more damning. It's a letter from the territorial surveyor confirming that the dam in the photograph is built on federal land without permits or authorization." Clara stared at the documents, a mix of emotions washing over her. Pride in William for pursuing the truth. Anger that he'd kept her in the dark. Fear of what this evidence might cost them all. "What do we do with this?" she asked. "Take it to the territorial governor," Thomas replied promptly. "This is enough to bring charges against Harrington." "And if the governor is in Harrington's pocket," Ethan asked, "then we go over his head, to the federal authorities in Washington if necessary." Clara gathered the papers carefully, returning them to the box. "We need to think this through. Harrington has power influence. If William was killed for discovering this, all the more reason to act quickly," Thomas argued. "The longer we wait, the more danger we're in." They were so engrossed in their discussion that none of them noticed the rider approaching until it was too late. A sharp whistle made them turn. Caleb Mercer sat on his horse at the edge of the clearing, a rifle resting casually across his saddle. "Well now," he drawled, "isn't this a touching family reunion? The widow, the brother, and the hired gun all having a picnic by the old tree." Clara instinctively clutched the metal box closer. "Morning, Mercer," Ethan said evenly, positioning himself slightly in front of Clara. "Out for an early ride?" "Just Checking fences, Mercer replied, his cold eyes taking in the scene. Mr. Harrington likes to keep an eye on his neighbors, especially when they start digging up family mementos. This is Sullivan land, Thomas said sharply. You're trespassing. Mercer's smile didn't reach his eyes. Just passing through. Public access along the stream according to territorial law. His gaze fixed on the metal box in Clara's hands. Found something interesting, Mrs. Sullivan. Just old letters, Clara lied smoothly. Sentimental value only. Is that so? Mercer made a show of studying the tree, the disturbed earth around it. Funny place to keep letters. What do you want, Mercer? Ethan asked, his voice deceptively calm. Just delivering a message. Mr. Harrington was disappointed to hear about your house guests, Mrs. Sullivan, especially Mr. Thomas here, who's been asking a lot of questions around the territory. Questions about water rights and property boundaries. Mercer leaned forward in his saddle. Mr. Harrington values his privacy. He'd hate to see anyone stirring up trouble based on misunderstandings. Is that a threat? Thomas demanded. Just friendly advice. Montana winter's harsh enough without making enemies. Mercer straightened. You folks have a good day now. And Mrs. Sullivan, do think about Mr. Harrington's offer. Price of land only goes down when winter sets in. With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, following the stream toward Harrington's property. He saw the box, Clara said, her voice tight with tension. He'll tell Harrington. Then we need to move quickly, Thomas urged. Get these documents somewhere safe. Not to town, Ethan said firmly. Mercer will have men watching the roads. What about Sheriff Foster? Clara suggested. Whatever his faults, he's sworn to uphold the law. Thomas scoffed. Foster's been looking the other way for years where Harrington's concerned. Maybe, Ethan acknowledged, but he also came out yesterday to warn us about Harrington. That counts for something. They made their way back to the house, alert for any sign of more of Harrington's men. Sarah was awake when they returned, sitting at the kitchen table with her doll, looking worried. You were gone when I woke up, she said accusingly, running to Ethan. I thought, I'm sorry, sunshine, he soothed, lifting her into his arms. We had to check something by the stream. I should have left you a note. Clara watched them, her heart twisting. Sarah's fear of abandonment was all too understandable after losing her mother. It was a fear Clara recognized in herself, the dread of being left alone again. Sarah, she said gently, how would you like to help me make pancakes for breakfast, with blueberry syrup? The distraction worked. Soon, the kitchen was filled with the homey smells of cooking and the sound of Sarah's chatter. For a brief time, they could pretend that everything was normal, that danger wasn't closing in around them. After breakfast, Ethan took Sarah outside to tend the animals, giving Clara and Thomas privacy to examine William's documents more thoroughly. These prove everything, Thomas said, spreading the papers across the table. The illegal dams, the water diversions, the pattern of property acquisitions after water sources mysteriously dried up. William even documented conversations with former ranch owners who were pressured to sell. But nothing that directly links Harrington to William's death, Clara pointed out. Not yet, Thomas tapped the small leather notebook. But William mentions meeting with someone called MV multiple times in the weeks before he died. Someone who worked for Harrington and had inside information. Miguel Vasquez, Clara realized. Rosa's brother. Ethan mentioned him yesterday. We need to find him, Thomas said. If he was William's informant, he might know what happened. Clara hesitated. Thomas, be honest with me. Do you really believe William was murdered? His eyes met hers, unwavering. I do, Clara. William wasn't a man to die easily, and the timing is too convenient. He finds evidence that could ruin Harrington, and suddenly he's struck down by a mysterious illness. I don't believe in coincidences that neat. Clara thought back to William's final days, the sudden onset of his illness, the strange symptoms that the doctor had struggled to explain. At the time, consumed by grief, she hadn't questioned the diagnosis. But now? "If you're right," she said slowly, "then we're all in danger. Not just you and me, but Ethan and Sarah too. All the more reason to act quickly." "Or to be cautious," Clara countered. "These are serious accusations, Thomas. We need to be absolutely certain before we take them to the authorities." "William was certain," Thomas said firmly. "That should be enough for both of us." Before Clara could respond, the door burst open. Ethan entered quickly, his expression grim. "Riders coming," he announced. 6 of them from the direction of Harrington's ranch. Clara felt her blood run cold. "Mercer." "Leading them," Ethan confirmed. "And they're armed." Thomas was already on his feet, reaching for William's rifle. "We knew this might happen. We stand our ground." "Not with Sarah here," Clara said firmly. "She's innocent in all this." Ethan nodded. "Clara's right. We need to get Sarah somewhere safe." "The root cellar," Clara decided. "It's well hidden, and there's a tunnel that leads to the hill behind the house. William built it as an escape route in case of Indian attacks." "Does anyone else know about it?" Ethan asked. "Just me and William. Not even Thomas knew." "Good. Clara takes Sarah and the documents to the cellar. Thomas and I will deal with our visitors." "I'm not hiding while you two face Harrington's men," Clara protested. "Someone needs to protect Sarah and the evidence," Ethan said gently, "and if things go badly, someone needs to survive to tell the truth." The logic was undeniable, but it still felt wrong to Clara, like abandoning them to face danger alone. "Be careful," she said, gathering William's papers into the metal box. "Both of you." Ethan touched her cheek briefly. "We will. Now, go before they get here." Clara found Sarah in the barn talking to the kittens. "Sarah, sweetheart, I need you to come with me right away. We're going to play a special hiding game." The child must have sensed the urgency in Clara's voice because she didn't question or protest, just slipped her small hand into Clara's and followed her back to the house. The root cellar entrance was concealed behind a false panel in the pantry. Clara showed Sarah the hidden latch, then led her down the narrow steps into the cool darkness below. The metal box she tucked into a recess in the stone wall. "Is this because of the bad men, Mrs. Clara?" Sarah asked, her voice small in the enclosed space. Clara lit a lantern, illuminating their hideaway. Shelves of preserved food, barrels of flour and sugar. All the supplies needed to survive a harsh winter. "Yes, sweetheart," she answered honestly. "Some men are coming to talk to your father and Mr. Thomas, and I thought it would be better if we waited down here." "Are they going to hurt Papa?" Clara knelt before the child, taking her small hands in her own. "Your Papa is very strong and very smart. He knows how to take care of himself." "But what if—" "Listen," Clara said gently. "Do you remember the story I told you about my grandmother and the bear? How scared she was, but how brave she had to be to protect her family." Sarah nodded solemnly. "Well, sometimes we have to be brave like that, even when we're scared. Right now, the bravest thing we can do is stay quiet and hidden so your Papa can focus on talking to these men without worrying about us. Can you be that brave for me?" The child's chin lifted, a determination in her eyes that reminded Clara so much of Ethan. "I can be brave." "That's my girl." Clara pulled her close, inhaling the sweet scent of her hair. "Now, let me show you something special." She moved to the far wall of the cellar where a heavy wooden door was built into the stone. This is a secret tunnel. If I tell you open this door and follow the tunnel all the way to the end. It comes out on the hill behind the house under a big rock. From there you run to the Whitaker farm. Do you remember meeting Mrs. Whitaker at the general store? The old lady with the peppermint candy. That's right. She'll keep you safe until I come for you. But I don't want to go without you and Papa, Sarah protested. And hopefully you won't have to, Clara reassured her. This is just in case, like how your Papa taught you to swim, even though you might never fall in the river. Above them they heard the muffled sound of horses entering the yard. Sarah's hand tightened in Clara's. Remember, Clara whispered, we're being brave and quiet now, like mice. Sarah nodded, her eyes huge in her pale face. Clara extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness broken only by thin strips of light coming through the ventilation slats near the ceiling. From their hiding place they could hear the thud of boots on the porch, then indistinct voices. Clara strained to make out words, to discern if the conversation was civil or hostile. Then came the sound they both dreaded, the sharp crack of a gunshot, followed by another. Sarah whimpered, and Clara pulled her close, heart pounding. Shh, sweetheart. Remember the tunnel. If I tell you to run, you run, and don't look back. More gunshots echoed, then shouts. The thunder of hooves suggested riders circling the house. Clara heard glass breaking, a window perhaps, and then the unmistakable sound of a struggle inside the house. Clara! Ethan's voice, urgent and strained. Clara, run! She didn't hesitate. Grabbing the metal box and Sarah's hand, she flung open the tunnel door. Now, Sarah, run, like I showed you. The child balked for just a moment, then darted into the tunnel. Clara followed, pulling the door shut behind them. The passage was narrow and low, forcing Clara to crouch as they hurried through the darkness, guided only by the faint light filtering through air shafts William had cleverly disguised as gopher holes. Behind them, Clara heard the crash of the pantry door being broken down, then heavy footsteps on the cellar stairs. Men's voices echoed off the stone walls, angry and frustrated. They're gone! Check for a hidden exit. Nobody just disappears. Clara urged Sarah faster, praying the child wouldn't stumble in the dark. The tunnel seemed endless, though Clara knew it couldn't be more than 100 yards to the exit. Finally, they reached the end, a stone door camouflaged to look like part of the hillside from the outside. Clara pushed against it, but it refused to budge. It's stuck, she whispered, panic rising in her throat. Let me help, Sarah offered, adding her small strength to Clara's. Together they pushed until the door finally gave way, sliding aside just enough for them to squeeze through. They emerged behind a large boulder, just as Clara had described, with a view of the ranch house below. What they saw made Clara's blood run cold. Smoke rose from one of the windows. Fire. Harrington's men had set fire to her home. Papa! Sarah screamed, starting to rise. Clara pulled her back down. No, Sarah! We can't let them see us. Through tear-filled eyes they watched as flames began to consume the house William had built with his own hands. There was no sign of Ethan or Thomas. Either they had escaped, or they were still inside. We have to go, Clara said, her voice breaking. To the Whitaker farm, like I told you. But Papa, your Papa is smart, remember? If he can get out, he will. The best thing we can do is get to safety and find help. Clutching William's metal box and Sarah's trembling hand, Clara led the way through the trees toward the neighboring farm. Behind them, black smoke billowed into the clear Montana sky, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Whatever happened next, Clara knew nothing would ever be the same again. Margaret Whitaker had seen 82 Montana winters, and each one seemed harsher than the last. Her bones ached with the coming cold, an internal barometer more reliable than any store-bought instrument. This morning, her joints had screamed with particular vehemence, warning of a storm brewing on the horizon. She was gathering eggs from her small henhouse when she spotted them. Two figures emerging from the tree line, one tall, one small, moving with the urgent pace of those fleeing rather than simply traveling. "Land's sakes," she muttered, squinting against the morning light. As they drew closer, she recognized Clara Sullivan, her honey-colored hair coming loose from its pin's face smudged with dirt. Beside her was a child Margaret had seen only once before at the general store in town, a little girl with dark braids clinging to Clara's hand. "Clara," Margaret called, setting down her basket and moving toward them. "What, in heaven's name, Mrs. Whitaker?" Clara gasped out of breath from running. "We need help." It was then that Margaret noticed the smoke rising in the distance beyond the hills that separated her modest farm from the Sullivan Ranch. "Good Lord," she breathed. "Your place," Clara nodded, her face grim. "Harrington's men." She glanced down at the child whose eyes were wide with fear. "This is Sarah. Her father Ethan works for me. He's still back there with my brother-in-law Thomas." "Come inside," Margaret said firmly, ushering them toward her small cabin. "You're safe here." Inside, Margaret settled Sarah by the fire with a mug of warm milk and a quilt around her thin shoulders. The child's face was pale, her eyes too old for her years. "Now," Margaret said, pouring coffee for Clara, "tell me everything." Clara's hands trembled as she clutched the metal box in her lap. Haltingly, she explained about William's investigation into Harrington's water theft, Thomas's return with his suspicions about William's death, and the confrontation that had just occurred at the ranch. "Ethan told us to run," she finished, her voice breaking. "The last I saw, Harrington's men had set fire to the house." Margaret's weathered face creased with concern. "Did you see if the men got away?" "No." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "They could still be in there or captured or—" "Now none of that," Margaret interrupted firmly. "No use borrowing trouble till it comes knocking. First things first, we need to get word to Sheriff Foster." "Thomas doesn't trust him," Clara said. "He thinks Foster looks the other way when it comes to Harrington." "Daniel Foster's a complicated man," Margaret acknowledged, "but I've known him since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His heart's in the right place, even if his backbone needs stiffening sometimes." She rose stiffly. "I'll send my ranch hand Jeb to town with a message. Meanwhile, you and the child will stay here." Clara nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitaker." The old woman waved away her thanks. "Been too quiet around here anyway. Now, let me see what's in that box that's got Harrington's men burning down houses." While Margaret examined William's documents, Clara moved to sit beside Sarah. The child had barely spoken since their escape, her small face pinched with worry. "Your papa's going to be all right," Clara said softly, though she had no way of knowing if it was true. "He's smart and strong. He promised he wouldn't leave me," Sarah whispered. "After Mama died, he promised." Clara's heart contracted painfully. "And he meant it, sweetheart. Your papa keeps his promises." She smoothed Sarah's tangled hair. "You were so brave in the tunnel. I'm very proud of you." Sarah leaned against her, seeking comfort. "What happens now?" It was the question Clara had been asking herself since they'd watched the smoke rise from her home. Everything she owned was in that house. Her memories of William, her hopes for the future, all the careful work of the past 8 years. "Now we wait," she said simply, "and we pray." Outside, the wind had picked up, bringing with it the scent of snow. The storm Margaret's bones had predicted was moving in fast, dark clouds gathering on the northern horizon. Soon, the roads would be impassable, isolating them until the weather cleared. Clara could only hope that Ethan and Thomas had escaped the fire and Harrington's men. The alternative was too painful to contemplate. Ethan Calloway had been in tight spots before, but few as desperate as this one. The moment Mercer and his men had arrived, he'd known they weren't there to talk. The glint in Mercer's eye, the way his men spread out to surround the house. These were the tactics of men planning violence, not negotiation. He and Thomas had managed to hold them off initially using the house for cover. But when the first torch had come crashing through the window, setting the curtains ablaze, Ethan had known they couldn't stay. "Clara!" he'd shouted, praying she would hear him from wherever she was hiding with Sarah. "Clara, run!" In the chaos that followed, gunfire, smoke, the crash of breaking glass, Ethan had lost track of Thomas. One moment, William's brother had been beside him returning fire from behind the overturned kitchen table. The next, he was gone. Ethan had made it out through the back door only to be confronted by two of Harrington's men. The fight had been brief but brutal. His knuckles were raw, and he could feel blood trickling from a cut above his eye, but both men now lay unconscious in the dirt. He'd circled back, trying to re-enter the house to find Thomas, but the flames had spread too quickly. The dry timber of the old ranch house had caught like kindling, turning the structure into a roaring inferno within minutes. "Thomas!" he'd called, choking on smoke. "Thomas!" There had been no answer, only the crackling of flames and the crash of burning timbers. Now, hours later, Ethan crouched in the shelter of a rocky outcropping half a mile from what remained of the Sullivan Ranch. The snow had started falling thick flakes that melted on his heated skin, but were beginning to accumulate on the ground around him. His coat was torn, his hat lost somewhere in the fight. He had no weapon, no horse, no supplies. Worse, he had no idea where Clara and Sarah had gone. Clara had mentioned a root cellar with a tunnel, but where did it lead? And had they made it out before Mercer's men found them? The thought of Sarah, his brave, solemn little girl, lost in the snow or captured by Harrington's men, made his chest constrict with fear. After losing Rebecca, he couldn't bear to lose his daughter too. And Clara, in just 2 short weeks, she had become essential to him, a lighthouse in the storm of his grief and wandering. He needed to find them, but first, he needed help. Stumbling through a snowstorm with no supplies would only result in his death, leaving Sarah truly orphaned. No, he needed to be smart to survive so he could protect those he loved. The words settled in his mind with surprising rightness. Yes, he loved them both, his daughter and the widow who had taken them in when they had nothing. With renewed determination, Ethan studied his surroundings. The falling snow made it difficult to see far, but he knew the general layout of the area from his work on the ranch. The nearest neighbor was Margaret Whitaker, her small farm nestled in a protected valley about 3 miles east. If Clara had escaped with Sarah, that's where they would go. Steeling himself against the cold, Ethan began moving eastward, keeping to the shelter of rocks and trees as much as possible. The snow was falling faster now, driven by a wind that cut through his damaged coat like a knife. Each step became an act of will, his body protesting the cold and his injuries. But he kept going, 1 foot in front of the other, focusing on the image of Sarah's smile, the warmth of Clara's hand in his. They needed him. He would not fail them. The storm intensified, the world narrowing to a swirling veil of white. Ethan lost track of time, aware only of the burning in his lungs and the numbness creeping into his extremities. Frostbite was a real danger now, but stopping meant death. Just when he thought he couldn't go any further, the wind shifted momentarily, revealing a faint light in the distance. A lantern in a window, perhaps, or a fire burning in a hearth. Hope surged through him, giving his frozen limbs new strength. He stumbled toward the light, his legs moving mechanically now, his mind focused solely on reaching that beacon in the white wilderness. The snow was ankle-deep, then calf-deep, each step requiring more effort than the last. The light grew closer, resolving into the warm glow of a cabin window. Ethan's vision blurred his consciousness, fading in and out. He was so cold, so tired. With the last of his strength, he reached the door and pounded on it with a nearly frozen fist. The sound seemed feeble even to his own ears, lost in the howl of the wind. He tried again, leaning heavily against the door frame. The door swung open suddenly, nearly causing him to fall forward. A blurred figure stood before him, backlit by the golden light of a fire. "Sweet Jesus!" a woman's voice exclaimed. "Clara! Come quick!" Ethan tried to speak, to ask if Sarah was safe, but his lips wouldn't move properly. The world tilted sideways, and darkness closed in around him. The last thing he heard, before consciousness slipped away, was Sarah's voice, high and frightened. "Papa, Papa, wake up!" Sheriff Daniel Foster had been in his office warming his hands around a cup of coffee when Jeb Whitaker burst in, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. "Sheriff," the young ranch hand gasped, "Mrs. Whitaker sent me. There's trouble at the Sullivan place. Fire. Harrington's men." Foster was on his feet instantly, reaching for his coat and gun belt. "What happened?" "Is Clara all right?" "She's safe at Mrs. Whitaker's. Got a little girl with her. But her place is burning, and there are men still missing." "Thomas Sullivan and Ethan Calloway," Foster said grimly. Jeb nodded. "Mrs. Whitaker says to tell you Clara has proof of what William was investigating. Something about water rights and illegal dams. Says it's enough to bring charges against Harrington." Foster's jaw tightened. He'd suspected for years that Harrington was manipulating water access to force smaller ranchers to sell, but he'd never had enough evidence to act against a man with the governor's ear. And if Harrington had escalated to arson and possibly murder— "Gather some men," he ordered Jeb. "Anyone who can ride and shoot. Meet me at the crossroads in 20 minutes." As Jeb hurried out, Foster opened his desk drawer and withdrew a battered tin star, a second deputy's badge he kept for emergencies. This qualified. He would need all the official authority he could muster to confront Harrington. The storm was picking up by the time Foster and his hastily assembled posse, 6 men from town plus Jeb, reached the Sullivan Ranch. What they found was a smoldering ruin, where the house had stood the barn and outbuildings untouched, but the main house reduced to charred timbers and ash. "Spread out," Foster ordered. "Look for survivors." They searched the property thoroughly but found no sign of Thomas Sullivan or Ethan Calloway, alive or dead. The only evidence of violence was bloodstains in the yard, and 2 sets of horse tracks leading back toward Harrington's land, partially obscured by the falling snow. "They could have escaped," suggested Robert Coleman, the storekeeper who had volunteered despite his 60 years. "Headed for the hills, maybe." "In this weather," another man countered. "They'd freeze to death without supplies." Foster knelt by one of the bloodstains, his old war wound protesting the movement. "Calloway struck me as the resourceful type. If anyone could survive, it'd be him. And Thomas Sullivan." Foster's expression darkened. "That hothead might have gotten himself captured. Or worse." They continued searching until the storm made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Reluctantly, Foster called his men together. "We'll head to the Whitaker place," he decided. "Check on Clara and the child, then wait out the storm. Nothing more we can do here now." As they rode eastward, Foster's mind was busy piecing together what had happened and what needed to happen next. If Clara truly had evidence against Harrington, and if Harrington had retaliated with violence, then the time for looking the other way was over. Law and order meant nothing if the most powerful man in the territory could burn homes and threaten women and children with impunity. It was time to take a stand, even if it cost him his badge. Or his life. Clara sat beside Ethan's bed, gently bathing his face with cool water. The fever had broken during the night, but he still hadn't fully regained consciousness, only brief moments of awareness before slipping back into uneasy sleep. When he had collapsed on Margaret's doorstep 2 days ago, half frozen and injured, Clara had feared the worst. But Margaret, with her decades of frontier experience, had taken charge immediately. They had stripped off Ethan's frozen clothes, wrapped him in warmed blankets, and treated his frostbitten hands and feet with snow and cool water, gradually warming him to prevent tissue damage. The cut above his eye had required stitches, which Margaret had applied with the same steady hand she used for quilting. There were other injuries, too. Bruised ribs, a sprained wrist, countless smaller cuts and abrasions that spoke of a desperate fight. Through it all, Sarah had refused to leave her father's side, her small face solemn with fear and determination. Only now, after days of vigilance, had the child finally succumbed to exhaustion, curled up asleep in a chair on the other side of the bed. "You should rest too," Sheriff Foster said quietly, entering the small bedroom with a cup of coffee for Clara. "You've barely slept since I arrived." Clara accepted the coffee gratefully. "I can't. Not until he wakes properly." Foster studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the worry lines etched around her mouth. In the short time since William's death, Clara seemed to have aged years. Yet there was a new strength in her bearing, a resilience forged in fire. "He's strong," Foster said, nodding toward Ethan. "He made it 3 miles through a blizzard with those injuries. Man like that doesn't give up easily." "No," Clara agreed softly. "He doesn't." They were silent for a moment, the only sounds the crackling of the fire in the hearth and Ethan's steady breathing. "I've been reviewing William's documents," Foster said finally. "It's all there. The illegal dams, the water diversions, the pattern of acquisitions after ranches mysteriously lost their water access. Enough to bring charges against Harrington, especially now that he's escalated to arson and attempted murder." "Will the territorial governor listen?" Clara asked skeptically. "Everyone knows he and Harrington are close." "He'll have to listen when federal marshals get involved." Foster's jaw set determinedly. "I've already sent a rider to Fort Benton with copies of the evidence and a request for federal assistance. Should take about a week for a response, depending on the weather." Clara's eyes widened. "You did that, knowing it might cost you your badge?" Foster shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her surprise. "Should have done it years ago. Too many good people have lost their land because I was cautious." He met her gaze directly. "William deserved better. You all did." Before Clara could respond, Ethan stirred his eyes, opening slowly. For a moment, he seemed disoriented, his gaze unfocused. Then his eyes found Clara, and clarity returned. "Sarah," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. "She's right here," Clara assured him, gesturing to the sleeping child. "She's fine. We both are." Relief washed over his face. He tried to sit up, but winced, his injuries protesting the movement. "Easy," Foster cautioned. "You've been through hell and back, nearly lost some fingers and toes to frostbite." Ethan sank back against the pillows. "Thomas?" Clara and Foster exchanged glances. "We don't know," Clara admitted. "He wasn't at the ranch when the sheriff's men searched, and there's been no sign of him since." "Harrington's men took him," Ethan said grimly. "I saw them dragging him out just before the roof started to collapse. Tried to go after them, but He gestured weakly at his injuries. Foster's expression hardened. That's kidnapping, on top of arson and attempted murder. He'll kill Thomas if he hasn't already, Ethan warned, once he gets whatever information he wants. Harrington isn't untouchable, Foster insisted. Not anymore. We have the evidence witnesses. He'll face justice. Justice moves too slowly, Ethan said, his voice stronger now, fueled by urgency. Thomas might not have that much time. Clara laid a gentle hand on his arm. You're in no condition to do anything right now. You need to heal. Ethan's eyes met hers, burning with determination despite his weakened state. I made you a promise, Clara. To protect you and Sarah. I couldn't save your home, but I will not let Harrington destroy anything else you love. The intensity in his gaze took her breath away. This was the man beneath the quiet exterior, a man of absolute conviction and unwavering loyalty, the man she had come to love. You kept your promise, she said softly. Sarah and I are safe because of you. Now you need to rest and regain your strength, for her sake, if not your own. As if on cue, Sarah stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw her father awake, her face transformed with joy. Papa, she cried, scrambling onto the bed and into his arms, heedless of his injuries. Ethan winced, but held her close, burying his face in her hair. Hello, sunshine, he murmured. I missed you. I was so scared, Sarah confessed, her voice muffled against his chest. But Mrs. Clara said you'd come back, and you did. I'll always come back to you, he promised. Always. Foster cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the intimate family moment. I should check on the weather. Storm seems to be breaking. He nodded to Clara and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Clara moved to follow, wanting to give father and daughter privacy for their reunion, but Ethan caught her hand. Stay, he said simply. Please. She hesitated, then settled back in her chair, her hand still in his. Sarah, exhausted, despite her joy, had already drifted back to sleep, curled against her father's side like a small kitten. I thought I'd lost you both, Ethan admitted, his voice low. When the house started burning and I couldn't find you. We got out through the tunnel, Clara explained. Just like I told Sarah we would. Made it to Mrs. Whitaker's before the worst of the storm hit. Smart woman, he said with a faint smile. Marrying a man who builds escape tunnels. William was always preparing for the worst, Clara said softly. I used to tease him about it. Now I'm grateful. They were quiet for a moment, the weight of all that had happened settling between them. Clara's home was gone. Thomas was missing, possibly dead. And Harrington was still out there, dangerous and desperate now that his crimes had been exposed. What happens next? Ethan asked finally. Clara looked down at their joined hands, her work-roughened fingers intertwined with his bandaged ones. Sheriff Foster has sent for federal marshals. Once they arrive, they'll arrest Harrington and his men. With William's evidence and our testimony, he'll face serious charges. And until then, we wait, heal, plan for the future. She met his gaze steadily. I still have the land. The barn and outbuildings are intact. We can rebuild. We, he questioned, his eyes searching hers. Clara's heart quickened. If you want to. If you and Sarah want to stay. Ethan's grip on her hand tightened slightly. I can't imagine being anywhere else. These past weeks, despite everything, have been the first time since Rebecca died that I've felt whole, that Sarah has truly smiled. He paused, gathering his courage. I love you, Clara Sullivan. I didn't think my heart had room for it after Rebecca. But there it is. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. Not tears of grief this time, but of a joy so unexpected and precious that it almost hurt. "I love you too," she whispered. "And I felt the same guilt, the same surprise. How could I love again after William? But you and Sarah, you made me remember what it feels like to be part of something, to have a family." Ethan lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then we'll rebuild. Together." Outside, the storm had indeed broken sunshine streaming through the window in a promise of clearer days ahead. But Clara knew that Harrington still posed a grave threat, and Thomas's fate remained unknown. Their newfound happiness was fragile, vulnerable to the harsh realities that awaited them beyond Margaret Whittaker's sheltering walls. Yet for this moment, with Sarah sleeping peacefully and Ethan's warm hand in hers, Clara allowed herself to hope, not just for survival, but for a future filled with the love she had thought lost forever. Victor Harrington was not a man accustomed to failure. From his early days as a fur trapper to his current status as the most powerful rancher in the territory, he had built his empire through a combination of ruthless determination and careful strategy. When obstacles arose, he removed them, one way or another. William Sullivan had been such an obstacle. The man's stubborn refusal to sell his strategically located ranch had been irritating enough. His subsequent investigation into Harrington's water management practices had been intolerable. The slow-acting poison Harrington had arranged to be administered through Sullivan's medicine had solved that problem neatly, or so he had thought. Now, pacing the study of his imposing stone house, Harrington faced the unpleasant reality that he had underestimated the Sullivan family's resilience. Not only had William's widow refused to sell, but his brother had returned with suspicions and evidence. Worse, Clara had taken in a man who was clearly more than a simple ranch hand, a man with the skills and determination to protect her. "This Calloway," Harrington said, turning to Mercer, who stood by the fireplace. "You're certain you've encountered him before?" Mercer nodded. "Not directly, but I know the type. The way he moves, the way he fought. He's had training. Law enforcement, most likely. And yet he travels with a child, takes work as a common ranch hand." Harrington frowned, considering. "A man running from something, perhaps, or someone. Could be useful information," Mercer suggested, "if we can discover what he's hiding." "Indeed." Harrington's gaze shifted to the door leading to the cellar, where Thomas Sullivan was being held. "Has our guest been forthcoming yet?" Mercer's scarred mouth twisted in a semblance of a smile. "Not yet, but everyone breaks eventually." "Time is a luxury we no longer have," Harrington reminded him. "Foster has already sent for federal marshals. Once they arrive, our options become severely limited." "What do you want to do, boss?" Harrington was silent for a moment, weighing his choices. The evidence William had gathered was damning, especially in the hands of federal authorities. His political connections would only shield him so far, and the governor would quickly distance himself from a scandal of this magnitude. "We need to eliminate all witnesses," he decided finally, "starting with the widow and Calloway, the child too, no loose ends." Mercer showed no reaction to the order to kill a child. "They're at the Whittaker place with Foster and his men standing guard. Won't be easy to get to them." "Then we draw them out." Harrington moved to his desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. "A simple message. Tell the widow we have her brother-in-law, and we'll trade him for William's evidence. All of it." "But she won't believe we'll let them go after the exchange," Mercer pointed out. "Of course not. But she'll come anyway. People with consciences are so predictably weak when it comes to family." Harrington began writing. "We'll arrange the meeting at Willow Creek. Remote, easily controlled. You'll take 6 men, our best. And if Foster comes with them, kill him first." Harrington's expression was coldly determined. "It's time to remind this territory who truly holds the power here." As Mercer left to deliver the message, Harrington stood at his window looking out over the vast expanse of land he had accumulated through decades of strategic acquisitions and occasional strategic removals. He had not come this far, sacrificed so much, to be brought down by a stubborn widow and her makeshift family. One way or another, the Sullivan problem would end at Willow Creek. Permanently. The message arrived at Margaret Whitaker's farm 3 days later, delivered by a young ranch hand who claimed no knowledge of its contents. Sheriff Foster read it first, his expression growing grimmer with each line. "It's from Harrington," he told Clara and Ethan, who had recovered enough to sit at the kitchen table. "He has Thomas. Says he'll trade him for William's evidence, all of it, including what's in your possession." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Is Thomas alive?" Foster handed her the letter. "See for yourself." At the bottom of the page was a scrawled note in different handwriting. "Still alive. Don't give him what he wants. T.S. It could be forged," Ethan said cautiously. "No." Clara shook her head. "That's Thomas's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere." "He wants to meet tomorrow at noon," Foster noted. "Willow Creek." "The very place William was investigating," Clara said. "It's a trap." "Obviously," Foster agreed, "but it might also be our only chance to save Thomas." Ethan, who had been studying the letter, looked up. "He doesn't know we've already sent copies of the evidence to Fort Benton. He thinks if he gets William's original documents, he can still contain this." "Which gives us an advantage," Foster nodded. "We could prepare a false set of documents, make the exchange—" "And he kills us all anyway," Ethan interrupted. "Men like Harrington don't leave witnesses." Clara's mind was racing, weighing options, calculating risks. What if we turned the trap around, used the meeting to capture Harrington instead? Both men looked at her with surprise. "How?" Foster asked. "We know the terrain better than he does," Clara explained. "William mapped every inch of that area when he was gathering evidence. We know where the diversions are, where his men would likely hide. If we positioned your posse ahead of time—" "It could work," Ethan said slowly. "But it's risky. Harrington won't come himself. He'll send Mercer and his men." "Then we capture Mercer," Clara insisted. "Force him to testify against Harrington. Between that and William's evidence, it would be enough." Foster stroked his beard thoughtfully. "It's dangerous. But sitting here waiting for the federal marshals while Thomas is in Harrington's hands, that might be worse." "I'm going," Clara declared, "whether you come or not." "You're not going alone," Ethan said firmly. "None of us is going alone," Foster decided. "I can gather 10 men, good shots, all of them. With the element of surprise, we might just pull this off." They spent the rest of the day planning using William's maps to identify the best positions for Foster's men. Sarah was sent to play with Margaret's grandchildren, who had come to visit, keeping her safely occupied and out of earshot. As evening fell, Clara found Ethan on the porch staring out at the snow-covered landscape. His injuries had improved remarkably in the past days, though he still moved stiffly and his hands remained bandaged. "You should be resting," she said, joining him. "Can't rest. Too much to think about." He turned to her, his expression serious. "I don't like you being part of this, Clara. It's too dangerous." "Thomas is my family," she said simply. "And Harrington destroyed my home. I need to be there." Ethan sighed, knowing better than to argue with her determination. "Promise me you'll stay back. Let Foster and his men handle the confrontation." "I promise to be careful," she said. which wasn't quite the same thing. But you should be worried about yourself too. You're not fully healed. I've fought in worse condition. His hand found hers, fingers interlacing gently. Clara, if something goes wrong tomorrow— Don't, she interrupted. We can't think that way. We have to, he insisted. Sarah, if I don't come back— You will come back, Clara said fiercely. We both will, and so will Thomas. Ethan pulled her closer, his arm wrapping around her shoulders. I used to think Rebecca's death was punishment for the life I led the men I hunted and sometimes killed. I thought I didn't deserve happiness again. And now? Now I think that life is too short and too precious to waste on guilt and regret. He looked down at her, his eyes reflecting the fading light. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that these weeks with you and Sarah have been a gift I never expected. Clara leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. When this is over, when Thomas is safe and Harrington is facing justice, we'll rebuild the ranch. Make it a home again. I'd like that, he said softly. They stood together in the gathering dusk, watching as the first stars appeared in the clear winter sky. Tomorrow would bring danger and uncertainty, but tonight they had this moment of peace, this promise of a future worth fighting for. Inside the house, Sarah's laughter mingled with the chatter of Margaret's grandchildren, the sound of innocence and joy that both Clara and Ethan were determined to protect, whatever the cost. Willow Creek lay in a shallow valley, its waters partially frozen in the winter cold. Once a vibrant stream that had supported several small ranches, it was now barely a trickle where it passed through the properties Harrington had acquired. The illegal dam that William had discovered and documented was hidden in a ravine upstream, invisible from the meeting point Harrington had designated. Clara, Ethan, and Sheriff Foster arrived precisely at noon, approaching on horseback from the east. Clara carried a saddlebag that supposedly contained William's original documents. In reality, it held convincing forgeries that Robert Coleman had helped create along with a small Derringer pistol, a last resort that Foster had insisted she take. Foster's men were already in position concealed among the rocks and trees surrounding the meeting place. They had arrived before dawn, using the darkness and their knowledge of the terrain to avoid detection. As they reached the center of the small clearing beside the creek, 3 riders emerged from the trees on the opposite bank. Mercer led them, his scarred face impassive. Behind him, Thomas Sullivan sat astride a horse, his hands bound before him, his face bruised and bloodied, but his eyes alert and defiant. The third rider was one of Harrington's regular hands, a young man Clara recognized from town. "Right on time," Mercer called, halting his horse at the edge of the creek. "Harrington appreciates punctuality." "Where is he?" Foster demanded, too cowardly to show his face. Mr. Harrington had pressing business elsewhere, Mercer replied smoothly. "I speak with his full authority." His cold gaze fixed on Clara. "You brought the documents." Clara patted the saddlebag. "All of William's evidence. Original maps, notes, the photograph of your illegal dam. Everything." "And the copies?" Mercer asked sharply. "Harrington wants all copies as well." "There are no copies," Clara lied. "William was careful to keep everything in one place, for safety." Mercer's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Throw the bag over. After we verify the contents, we'll release Sullivan." "That's not how this works," Foster interrupted. "We exchange at the same time. Sullivan for the documents." A tense silence followed as Mercer considered this. Then he nodded to the young ranch hand, who prodded his horse forward, leading Thomas's mount by a rope. "Send her with the documents," Mercer ordered, indicating Clara. "They'll meet in the middle." Clara glanced at Ethan, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. This was the plan. Get close enough to signal Foster's men who were waiting for her cue. She urged her horse forward, crossing the shallow creek with the saddlebag clutched in her hand. Thomas was brought to meet her, the young ranch hand keeping a tight grip on his bound wrists. As they drew alongside each other, Clara looked into her brother-in-law's battered face. "Are you all right?" she whispered. "Been better," Thomas managed through split lips. "Clara, it's a trap. There are more men hidden." "I know," she cut him off. "So do we." Understanding dawned in Thomas's eyes. He gave a slight nod, then raised his voice. "The documents, you brought them." "Everything William collected," Clara confirmed loudly for Mercer's benefit. As she spoke, she shifted in her saddle, using the movement to tug at her scarf, the signal Foster's men were waiting for. The young ranch hand reached for the saddlebag, his attention focused on the supposed evidence. In that moment, Clara moved swiftly, pulling the hidden derringer from her skirt pocket and pressing it against the young man's side. "Don't move," she ordered quietly. "My brother-in-law is leaving with me." Before the ranch hand could react, shots rang out from the surrounding hillsides. Foster's men, emerging from their hiding places, had opened fire on Mercer and his hidden reinforcements, who were now revealed as they returned fire from the trees. The young ranch hand, panicking, yanked hard on Thomas's reins, causing both their horses to rear. In the chaos, Clara's derringer discharged the bullet, grazing the ranch hand's arm. He cried out in pain and released Thomas's reins, spurring his own horse away from the gunfire. "Go!" Clara shouted to Thomas, pulling a knife from her boot to cut his bonds. "Head for the North Ridge. Foster's men will cover us." Across the creek, she saw Ethan and Foster taking shelter behind rocks, returning fire at Mercer and his men. The carefully planned ambush had devolved into a chaotic gunfight, with bullets whizzing in all directions. As Thomas wheeled his horse toward the ridge, Clara prepared to follow. But a sharp pain suddenly blossomed in her side, the force of it nearly knocking her from the saddle. She looked down in confusion to see a spreading crimson stain on her coat. "Clara?" Ethan's voice seemed to come from very far away. Through increasingly blurry vision, she saw him spurring his horse toward her, heedless of the bullets flying around him. Her hands felt strangely numb as she tried to hold on to the reins. The sky tilted oddly, and then she was falling, the cold ground rising up to meet her with shocking suddenness. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was Ethan screaming her name. The raw anguish in his voice cutting through the gunfire and chaos, like a knife through her heart. Clara floated in a haze of pain and confusion, voices drifting around her like fragments of dreams. Sometimes she recognized them. Ethan's low, urgent tones, Sarah's tearful questions, Margaret Whitaker's practical instructions. Other times the voices were strange clinical, discussing things like blood loss and infection risk. Time lost all meaning. She would surface briefly into consciousness, aware of a burning pain in her side, and gentle hands changing bandages, only to sink back into the merciful darkness. Once she opened her eyes to find Ethan asleep in a chair beside her bed, his face haggard with exhaustion, and worry, his hand still holding hers even in sleep. She tried to speak, to reassure him, but her throat was too dry, and darkness claimed her again before she could form the words. Another time she woke to find Sarah curled beside her on the bed, the child's small body warm against her uninjured side, her dark head tucked trustingly against Clara's shoulder. In that moment, despite the pain, Clara felt a surge of fierce maternal love so strong it brought tears to her eyes. Gradually, the periods of wakefulness grew longer. Clara learned that she had been shot during the confrontation at Willow Creek, the bullet grazing her ribs and causing significant blood loss, but miraculously missing any vital organs. She had been unconscious for 3 days, during which time a doctor had been brought from town to remove the bullet and treat the wound. On the 4th day, she was strong enough to sit up briefly and hear what had happened after she fell. It was chaos, Ethan told her, sitting on the edge of her bed. His face was drawn with fatigue, but relief shone in his eyes now that she was recovering. When you were hit, I lost my mind a little. Rode straight for you, not caring about the gunfire. Foolish man, Clara whispered, her voice still weak. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. For you, always, he continued. Thomas came back when he saw you fall. Between us, we got you onto my horse and away from the worst of the fighting. Foster and his men provided cover, then pursued Mercer and his gang toward Harrington's property. Did they catch them? Ethan's expression darkened. Mercer escaped, but they captured 3 of his men. One of them, facing charges of attempted murder, decided to save his own skin by turning on Harrington. Gave a full confession about William's death. Confirmed it was poison administered gradually over weeks on Harrington's orders. Clara closed her eyes, the confirmation of what they had suspected, bringing a mixture of vindication and renewed grief. And Harrington, gone, Ethan said grimly. Fled the territory the night after the shootout, taking whatever valuables he could carry. Foster has telegraphed descriptions to every law enforcement office in the surrounding territories and states. He won't get far. And Thomas, recovering like you. Harrington's men worked him over pretty badly, but nothing permanent. He's staying in town for now, giving formal statements to Foster, and waiting for the federal marshals to arrive. Clara absorbed this information slowly, her mind still sluggish from pain and medication. Sarah, Ethan's expression softened. Scared, but brave. She's been helping Margaret tend to you, bringing cool cloths for your forehead, insisting on sleeping beside you every night. She loves you, Clara. And I love her, Clara said simply, as if she were my own. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Hope, perhaps, or a deeper emotion he wasn't ready to name. He took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. Clara, when you fell, when I saw you bleeding in the snow, his voice broke slightly. I realized I couldn't lose you. Not after everything we've been through, everything we've found together. You didn't lose me, she assured him. I'm still here. I want you to be more than still here, he said earnestly. When you're well, when this is all over, I want us to build a life together. You, me, Sarah. A real family. Despite her weakness, joy bloomed in Clara's heart. Are you proposing Ethan Calloway? Inelegantly, but yes. His smile was tender, his eyes holding hers. I love you, Clara Sullivan. Will you marry me? Make a home with Sarah and me? It won't be easy, rebuilding the ranch, dealing with whatever comes next. But we'd face it together. Clara thought of William, of the life they had built, and the dreams they had shared. She would always love him, always honor his memory. But life continued, offering new beginnings, new loves, new dreams to pursue. Yes, she said softly. Yes, I will marry you, Ethan. I want that life, our life, more than anything. He leaned forward, pressing his lips gently to hers in a kiss that held both promise and restraint, mindful of her injuries. When he pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. I should let you rest, he said, rising reluctantly. The doctor said not to tire you. Send Sarah in before you go, Clara requested. I want to tell her myself. When the child entered a few minutes later, her small face anxious, Clara held out her arms. "Come here, sweetheart," she invited. Sarah approached carefully, clearly afraid of hurting her. "Are you feeling better, Mrs. Clara?" "Much better now that you're here." Clara patted the edge of the bed. "I want to ask you something very important." Sarah climbed up beside her, solemn and attentive. "Your papa has asked me to marry him," Clara said gently. "That would make me your stepmother. How would you feel about that?" The child's eyes widened, then filled with tears. For a terrible moment, Clara feared she had overstepped, that Sarah wasn't ready for this change. But then the little girl threw her arms around Clara's neck, burying her face against her shoulder. "Does that mean you'll be my mama for real?" Sarah asked, her voice muffled. Clara's own eyes grew wet. "If you want me to be." Sarah pulled back to look at her earnestly. "I do. I've been wishing and wishing. Papa says Mama would want us to be happy, and you make us happy." "You make me happy too, sweetheart." Clara smoothed Sarah's dark hair. "So very happy." As Sarah snuggled against her, careful of her injured side, Clara gazed out the window at the winter landscape. The world outside was harsh and unforgiving, full of challenges they had yet to face. Harrington was still at large, the ranch needed rebuilding, and the future held no guarantees. But here, in this moment, with Sarah's warm weight against her and the knowledge of Ethan's love, Clara felt a peace she had thought lost forever. From the broken pieces of their separate tragedies, they were creating something new. A family forged in fire and tempered by love stronger for having been broken and remade. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, sending rays of golden light across the snow-covered valley. Spring would come, eventually, bringing new growth, new beginnings. And they would be ready. Together.